Love yourself first on today's Oblyron Spirituality. Greetings everyone, I am Oblyron, Lord of the Underworld and consort to the most lovely Hecate. Thank you for joining me on today's episode where we are going to talk about how integrating the Anima or the Animus can lead to a greater sense of wholeness within ourselves and how that wholeness can lead to a greater love for ourselves and for those around us. Now, if you resonate with today's message, please let us all know by leaving a like or subscribe, or maybe perhaps a comment. And if you're interested, I also do guided meditations on Saturdays on my Discord server, and the link is in the description for that. So this video is a continuation of my previous video, which is improving relationships through shadow integration. I'm going to be going a little bit more in depth into what happens after we begin to integrate our shadows. I'll be going over some of the pitfalls that can happen while we're integrating our shadows, and I'll be diving into a little bit of my own personal experiences for reference. So one of the pitfalls of shadow integration, which I'm going to start off with, is that when we begin to learn these things, we have a tendency to over-intellectualize the experience. This is something that Carl Jung had warned about. We can learn the archetypes, we can learn the patterns, we can even look at ourselves with great precision and think that we have arrived or that we have successfully integrated our shadows. But really, the process of shadow integration is a lifelong process. It never ends. And in fact, it does what's called a spiral, in that, we may discover an aspect of our shadow, let's say in our 30s, and then we will rediscover that aspect with greater, let's say, clarity or with greater depth in our 40s, and then come back to it again with greater depth in our 50s, so on and so forth, pretty much for our entire lives. And so because we're always viewing things from a different perspective, it's really important to always keep an open mind about it. Another thing too, in over-intellectualizing our shadow integration, is that it's something which has to be felt. It's something which, it's a very visceral experience. It is something that isn't, you can't just write a book about it and expect to say, okay, well, I've thought my way into a shadow integration. Usually what happens is there is some type of traumatic event that happens which triggers, let's say, core wounds, core childhood wounds. For me, it was getting separated. It was getting divorced. It could be, and that's actually common for many people. It could also be losing a job. It could be health problems. Something which really has a huge impact, which has a traumatic effect on us, and many of the times it's something which is completely beyond our control. It has to be some type of external factor, or if it's health-wise, then it'll be an internal factor, but it was an unexpected internal factor. So again, you can't really just read a book and say, okay, well, I've integrated my shadow. And also, it's important to remember that integration is a lifelong process. It's a practice, much in the same way that our spiritual practices is a practice. We never arrive. We never stop learning, and we never get to the point where we say we know it all. And the moment we do think that we know it all, well, that's a moment that either we become very dogmatic in our approach, or maybe we are not as wise as we think that we are. So that is one caveat to integrating the shadow. Okay, so for men, we have a tendency to project our animus outwards. We have a tendency to feel that need to pretty much pour our love into a woman to feel complete. And for women, they have a tendency to project their anima inwards. And many times when one of the common patterns that I hear repeated is that, women are attracted to a man who can be the container of their emotions, who can hold his space in their own emotional chaos. But really, when it comes to shadow integration for both sexes, is that you don't need a person in your life to complete you, because you have that completion within yourself. So men turn their love inwards. They start to love themselves again. And everything that you would pour into a woman or into the relationship, you pour into yourself. Whereas women start to begin to contain their own emotions. They start to become, and they also start to adopt their sacred masculine. So in recognizing those emotions and also analyzing their own emotions, it's pretty fascinating how both men and women have these opposite effects to how they handle their shadows, but it's pretty well documented. Now, I would have to say, in my experience, what really kicked it off was that separation for me. What that experience has taught me, it gave me so much information. It gave me so many things that I've learned about myself. It taught me a lot of my own wounds. I began to really dive into Jungian psychology. And in my particular example, I didn't study this level of shadow work until after my separation. I had known about Carl Jung, and I was going through a shadow quickening since 2020, but it wasn't until 2025 when I really started to go back and look at it from a psychological perspective, really started to learn about the different aspects of shadow integration. For me beforehand, but before that, it was all a spiritual experience. If you've seen some of my other videos, like I left my wife for a goddess, or how I claimed the underworld, that was me essentially going through a Jungian shadow integration without me even knowing it. Because like I said, I started researching this stuff after the fact. And it's really amazing because, he already documented all this stuff. But like I said, had I read those types of things before, it probably would have lessened the experience a little bit because I would have intellectualized it. So does that mean that, there's a danger of making videos like this and trying to warn people about shadow integration? To a point, but as long as we're, aware of it, as long as we remember that these are external experiences which are beyond our control, which we need to feel to experience to really kind of get it kick-started, then yeah, at least we know what to expect. I'm glad that there is these resources out there to be able to learn. And chances are, if you're looking at these types of works, you've probably already been through some type of traumatic experience which you are trying to explain. It's amazing, the internet algorithms, how once you're willing to look for something, it'll be there, it'll pop up. So best wishes to everyone who's going through these tough times. Now, generally, when we go through something like that, like I said, whether you're a man or a woman, it doesn't matter. These experiences trigger core wounds, usually wounds that we've had since childhood. Many times it happens to us who are very empathetic. That's why in so many of these dynamics, there's usually an empath who is in a relationship with a narcissist. And again, the narcissist in many cases knows how to manipulate the empath, because from the empath's perspective, there is what is called the wounded healer archetype. And like I said, many of the times these are unconscious patterns that empaths have developed since childhood. It's when people feel like they've had to walk on eggshells, let's say around their parents or something, or maybe they felt like they were never really heard because they were walking on eggshells. Many times the most empathetic people come from, some of the most chaotic situations. And as children, especially if you don't seek therapy, or even in your 20s if you don't seek therapy, by the time we get into our adulthood, we begin to seek out those partners which mimic the relationships or the unconscious patterns that we've had when we were younger. And when we go through something like this, you pretty much have two choices. You can let it destroy you, and you can continue in the karmic cycles and continue in the unconscious patterns that have bound us and put us there in the first place, or we can really make an effort to understand things. And yeah, definitely making the effort to understand things, it doesn't take away the pain, it doesn't liberate a person, or it doesn't make anyone feel enlightened or elevated or anything like that. All it simply means is that there is greater clarity and understanding with what happened. And going into the future, perhaps we can better understand what our own unconscious patterns are so that we don't repeat the process. So in my particular case, one of the things which helped me to move on was not only making the efforts to understand a lot of these things and a lot of why things happened the way that they happened, but also I learned with my ex, she's just kind of repeating a lot of karmic cycles. And from an unconscious standpoint, she has not integrated her shadow, and she is still following those same patterns. And, this isn't a holier than thou, or, one person is better than another or anything, because we all live our lives and we all are on our own timelines. But what it did teach me was that there are just things which are beyond our control. There are things that, no matter what you do or what you say, sometimes the unconscious mind, it just has that much more of a stronghold than what is logical or what is rational. And one of the things about when we start to really go down the path of shadow integration and really start to realize a lot of these things is we begin to feel complete within ourselves. We don't feel the need to be with a person to feel that sense of wholeness and that sense of completeness. You can be in a relationship, you can not be in a relationship, you can have friends, you can not have friends. It doesn't matter, because you already feel satisfied and whole within yourself. So, this is in stark contrast to a lot of people who have not integrated their shadows, and they will jump through hoops to be with someone. And we've all been there at some point. Like I said, I've realized a lot of things in my own pre-shadow integration, and I realized, just how much I was giving of myself without, taking care of myself too. And nowadays it's like, okay, well, you have to put yourself first. You have to love yourself first. You have to feel complete within yourself before really inviting another person into your life. And we all hear these things. We all it's almost kind of cliche when we hear these things, but really the difference between let's say an integration or not integrating is the depth and weight with which you feel that. I realized how much of my marriage did come from a place of fear. It came from a place of, needing validation within my own life. And nowadays, like I said, it's really about finding the validation within myself. And again, it doesn't mean that there isn't anger or that there isn't other types of emotions. It just means that as these emotions arise, well, you start to know why are those emotions there, and really what are they trying to teach you. See, that's the thing with shadow integration, is that you begin to do it long enough, and it's not even about necessarily romantic relationships, but it's also about relationships with other people in general. Those people who maybe trigger those points within us. Maybe they trigger that rage in us. Maybe they trigger the jealousy or the envy within us, or they trigger the attraction within us. Why are those people triggering that within us? And what are the aspects of myself that I need to look at to where these things cause that type of reaction? So again, shadow integration isn't an end-all be-all, and it's not the end of the yellow brick road, so to speak. It is a process, and it is a practice. And the more we become aware of it, the more we feel it, the more honest we are with our emotions, well, the more we can really sort of take back our own lives and be able to take charge of our decisions with greater clarity. We don't feel the need to act out of unconscious impulses, and again, it's a lifelong process. So I'm going to leave it there for today. If you resonated with this message, then again, please let us all know with a like, subscribe, perhaps leaving a comment, letting us know how you resonated with it. And love and light, and wisdom and shadow. And now we shall close with a chant of Oblyron. Amde sote, amde Oblyron, amde sote, amde Oblyron.